Hello there. Today I'd like to take a look at an off-dry German Riesling from the Rheingau. So this is Schloss Vollrads 2022 Qualitatswein Feinherb. So this term Feinherb meaning an off-dry wine, perhaps with slightly more sweetness than you would get in something classified as a Halbtrocken, but not with significant sweetness. Now Schloss Vollrads is one of the larger and more historic estates of the Rheingau region. They produce a range of wines exclusively from Riesling that runs from sparkling wines through the whole quality range, and in years where possible they'll make ice wines, Trockenbeerauslese. Their top vineyard is a vineyard that is a monopole. They own it outright, called Schlossberg. And Schloss Vollrads is one of just a handful of famous old German estates that has the legal entity of a vineyard, and thus in law doesn't need to put the name of the village on its label. The estate has an 800-long-year history. The first records of Schloss Vollrads dating back to the early 1200s. And for pretty much all of this time, in fact up until 1997, the estate was owned by 27 generations of the Greiffenclau family. In 1997, the estate's bankruptcy saw it fall into the hands of the Nassauische Sparkasse Bank. Tragically, the estate's then owner, a very popular character and a huge advocate of Rheingau wines, the Count von Matuschka Greiffenclau, chose to end his life rather than see his beloved estate fall into the hands of the bank. Since then, the bank have actually made some really quite significant investments in both in renovating the property and in building the quality and the reputation of the wines from the estate. They're sheltered from the north by the mountains and a belt of forest. These are gently sloping south-facing vineyards with soils comprising quartzite, argillaceous shale and calcareous loess. Significantly, 2022 is the first vintage where the estate's been certified as being organic. It had been 3 years in transition to that stage. And so today, Schloss Vollrads has the largest holding of organic vineyards in the Hesse region of Germany, with 63 hectares of organic vines amongst the estate's area of about 80 hectares. 2022 was a warm, dry summer which saw ripeness really quite advanced. Some late rains from September onwards were a challenge, with careful selection at harvest required, with ripe grapes being produced, but with surprising delicacy and acid balance. The wine was entirely fermented in stainless steel tanks, so it would have been destemmed, crushed, pressed and left to settle so that the juice that was fermenting was a clean juice. Fermentation would have taken place at low temperatures, possibly as low as 16 degrees. They're not specified, but the idea being to sort of slow the fermentation and to prevent rapid production of CO2, which could strip aromas from the aromatic juice. There are no details given of any aging, so I would assume that any period of maturation simply went on in tank just to allow the wine to settle and to homogenise. The wine has, I believe, about 14 grams of sugar. Now I'm unsure if that's a sweetness that's been left in the wine or if it's been blended back. We'll see how fine the sweetness is, but possibly at this level the wine may have back blended sweetness. So let's have a see. First of all, looking at it, we have a water white to pale green colour. Swirling it, there are some very slight notes of CO2 there. They were quite obvious in the glass when I poured it, but they've dissipated now. The wine's got 12% of alcohol, but isn't significantly forming tears, very slowly, just starting to now. It's not a particularly viscous wine. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The lifted fruit aromas are of lime, quince and apple. It's sort of quite sharp green fruit. Laid over the top of that, there is a tiny touch of sort of struck match sulphury notes from fermentation. And behind that there's a sort of a delicate, sharp mineral note. So let's have a taste. The wine is light to medium bodied. The acidity is a lovely combination of sort of mineral crispness with just a tiny touch of sort of tart, malic crispness just at the finish. It doesn't overpower. Sometimes if the acidity is too tart, it can be unpleasant, but this is actually nicely balanced. Where I'm salivating at the edge of my tongue, I'm always getting sort of notes of apple skin, that sort of crisp green touch there. That's giving a nice length and freshness. There is a steely acidity runs through this and limey touches at the end, but the front palate is much more showing sort of crisp apple notes, and around the edges of my tongue they're apparent as well. As far as the sweetness is concerned, it has a roundness that makes me think there may be a back blended element in there. The liminess is coming across as slightly sort of waxed lime notes with almost the start of a touch of petrolly development note that you can sometimes get with longer aged Riesling. And then that opens up to give a sort of a broader note that I associate with quince, sort of a richer, heading more towards a pear style of liminess. The alcohol is sufficient just to be giving a little bit of weight across the back palate. This is not a huge wine, as I say, sort of light to medium bodied, but the alcohol is perhaps helping to give a little bit of weight to the rich, waxy, limey notes on the back palate. The wine lasts quite well, but it perhaps has a little bit more richness and roundness than I was expecting. Rather than a sort of a long, elegant citric finish, it's much more sort of lime pith and lime peel sort of notes. At its price point, this wine is quite fresh, quite elegant. The slight hint of sweetness really just softens the acidity and rounds it out a bit, just providing the wine with some nice balance. Certainly, it's a wine that could be drunk as an aperitif or would be a good accompaniment to food. I always think Riesling's a fantastic accompaniment to mature old cheeses, but this would work beautifully with sort of lovely oily smoked salmon or with goat's cheese or something like that. Looking at our Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, this vintage gets 88 out of 100, and I think that's quite a reasonable score for a wine with some quite nice finesse, with very clear Riesling character, but yet which holds back just a little from the rapier-like mineral acidity that you can sometimes get from slightly cooler climate Rieslings in Germany. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you found it of interest, we'd really appreciate it if you'd press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, please feel free to sign up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It would be fantastic to have your support there. If you'd like to leave any comments, please do pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your recommendation in that situation. I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher page for the vintage of this wine, and there you'll be able to see where the wine's available near you, what its pricing is. You can use the tabs on that page to find out more about the winemaking, the region, the producer, the grape variety. There are notes about the pricing history. You can find out what the critics have said about the wine. You can see what other users of the site have thought of the wine. So hopefully there we've assembled plenty of information for you so that you can make informed decisions about perhaps buying the wine. So thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to find some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.